Hi, I'm Ken Fisher. Welcome to the 16th season of CityWide. All year, we're talking politics, national and local. Our guest on this edition of CityWide is Josh Benson, the co-editor and a founder of the online publication Capital New York. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So what is an online publication, Capital New York?
Well, it's just like one of the old offline publications. My co-founder and I moved from the New York Observer to start our own thing. And it's essentially, originally conceived, it's a newspaper without the print. So it's actually, it's fairly straightforward in that way. There's a staff and we cover the news, and we have a website, but it enables us to be quite flexible in terms of engaging with the audience and pursuing the stories on the timelines that the news dictates.
Advertising funded?
In part, yeah.
Well, how else would you make money?
Well, there's opportunities in a website like this to have more engaged relationships with individual advertisers. So we do some custom content and special coverage. It's sort of, again, the old concept of an editorial calendar, but customized to advertisers and sponsors and partners. We're going to be doing more live events and conferences in the future. So there's other forms of revenue.
The mission, I guess, of the publication is to focus on important local people and institutions, and to tell people things that they don't already know. I guess every newspaper publication wants to tell people things that they don't already know. But is this sort of like the old New York Magazine focus, or the Observer focus on elites, how New York really works, and with a limited number of topics? Who's your audience, and sort of what's your editorial thing?
Well, so that's a great question. The challenge is always to be talking about in part, what the elites are talking about and what the opinion shapers are talking about, but the idea isn't to be exclusive in that way. So it isn't narrowly targeted to an elite audience. It's targeted toward an audience that wants to know what's going on. Ambitious in that way, but that cuts across geographic areas, particularly within New York City, lots of different professions and sort of socioeconomic divisions.
Several of the people that you've recruited to the staff come from a background of political reporting. Is that the main focus of what you're trying to accomplish?
What we started off with was a focus on politics, media, and culture. Because there was a sort of a deliberate decision that with limited resources and a small website to start off with, we would do the things we knew and focus on those and go deep and then expand from there, rather than trying to be comprehensive and general interesty off the bat. And as a function of that, and just the fact that we do love politics, we started out with a politics desk and hired 3 reporters on staff, and also call on some regular contributors to cover politics for us.
So this week, coming up, we're going to have congressional primaries, statewide on the Republican side, local races on the Democratic side. What's your intelligence telling you, from all of the reporting that you're doing? Let's take some of what I consider to be the key congressional races first. Charles Rangel, former chairman of Ways and Means, lost his position in a scandal, challenged from the Harlem community in the form of several candidates, including Clyde Williams, a former Clinton staffer, Adriano Espaillat, seeking to become the first Dominican member of Congress from New York. Who wins that race?
Well, I think the potential for predictions to make an ass of the political reporter are greater than usual.
Well, I have 3 more to ask.
I can't wait. because of redistricting. So it adds yet another variable into the mix here, which is that Charlie Rangel is running for re-election in a district that is substantially different from the district he's been running in since the early 70s. So here, obviously, I think you can make a very solid argument that this is his stiffest challenge ever. We said that last time because he was in the middle of an ethics scandal. But this time around, as you mentioned, there's Adriano Espaillat, who stands to become the first Dominican-American congressman ever. And that is a powerful narrative to tell to the voters in the district, the majority of whom, for the first time, are Latino. But there are other things to consider too. So, to the extent that it matters in the district, and again, it's very hard to say. The New York Times has given its endorsement to another candidate, Clyde Williams, who has ties to former President Clinton and President Obama, and no one knows how that affects the rough calculations of
Do you have a prediction?
I don't have a prediction there. I think the danger in terms of what the conventional wisdom has become, or my impression of it, is that is underestimating Rangel, just because people want to say, from what they pick up ambiently in the big media, that he's not enthusiastic, he doesn't have the support he used to.
So
but
look, I'll let
he's
you
won a bunch.
Right, I'll let you off the hook. I'm not going to ask you about Velasquez versus Delon, or Jeffries versus Barron, or Meng versus Landsman and Crowley, unless you want to, venture a guess on any of those. But I do want to ask about two things from these congressional elections. One is, do you think that ethnic politics is still ethnic politics? In other words, do you think that there's going to be a permanent split between the Dominican community and the African American community because of Espaillat's audacity of challenging Rangel? And also, do you think that the low turnout in these elections is also related to the fact that most of these races haven't really attracted significant money? In other words, if you look at these primaries where only the federal elections are on the ballot, everybody's predicting extremely low turnout and is that related to the fact that you don't have candidates spending millions and millions of dollars to chin the voters up?
Well, so the first part of the question, no, I don't think that it causes a permanent split between African American voters in the district and Dominican voters. Because the coalitions are fluid, every election's different, and beside, this is almost a cliche, but it's always worth noting that they never vote. These communities don't vote as a block the way that consultants like to talk about them voting as a block. So even within the Dominican American community in that district, there is a split, and that's reflected in a couple of the endorsements that Rangel has, et cetera. So I don't think it's simple. I certainly don't think the alliances shift permanently because of this, however hyperbolic the rhetoric from the candidates was before Espaillat got into the race. In terms of the turnout, it's a little bit heartbreaking, but I always feel like the lament about voter turnout in primaries is a little bit like the lament for horse racing in New York. It's, why can't there be young people going to this, and why shouldn't this be a vibrant thing? It's been that way for a long time, and I'm afraid that's how it's going to be. Occasionally there are extraordinary circumstances that make a given primary particularly interesting. But I don't think it's a simple function of money. I think the dates are awkward. It's its own thing. It takes quite a lot of motivation to turn out, and we shouldn't be surprised when it isn't what it should be.
And the coverage of the races is pretty horse racy. There's not a lot of investigative reporting going on about any of the congressional candidates, as best as I can tell.
No, that's certainly true, and so part of that is our fault. It's easier to do process than policy. It's easier to attract an audience. It's cheaper to do the reporting because horse racing is all, in large part, what's on the surface. But I also think that's in part a function of who's running. Charlie Rangel. It's about, in large part, this is about Charlie Rangel. He's the institution. He's been around forever. We know quite a lot about him.
Right. Let me ask you about the Republican primary for the U.S. Senate. I consider myself a fairly knowledgeable political observer. I know that two of the candidates who are running. The third one, I know who he is. I can't even remember his name. But you've got I guess it's the Nassau County Controller self-funding his campaign to the tune of $1 million. Wendy Long, a conservative activist lawyer, and Bob Turner, who won the Wiener race in somewhat of an upset. Each of them is reporting having raised less money for a statewide primary than the typical city council candidate raises in New York. And that's a race that seems to be attracting no interest whatsoever. Is that because Kirsten Gillibrand is so popular, or because the Republican Party in New York is so weak?
Well, both. But I think primarily it's a function of the fact that Kirsten Gillibrand is not generally seen as beatable, including by partisan Republican and conservative donors.
Which is pretty remarkable, considering she got off to such a rocky start.
She did get off to a rocky start, but it hasn't always, the way that she's consolidated her gains gradually hasn't always been that public. It hasn't been a huge story because a lot of it was behind the scenes. Really, her first acts of fence mending were with Democratic activists, core elements of the base, donors, the people who were bent out of shape because of the way that she got the seat, which is she was appointed under controversial circumstances and very clumsily by David Patterson. But she has solidified her gains, and in terms of the public game, again, she hasn't. She's not on the front page of the paper every day. She's not the subject of web coverage every day because she's a senator and she's doing little things. But she's hit on a couple of good themes. She's become sort of a champion of the women's cause, and she's remarkably become the liberal senator from New York, as Chuck Schumer has become sort of more of a national figure. So she's actually herself, and regardless of the weakness or not of the Republican field, she's in quite good shape. She has a lot of money. Her approval-disapproval numbers are very good. And I think at least two of the three Republican candidates sort of, it seems like they grossly overestimated what they were going to be able to do until now in terms of name recognition and fundraising. It's Turner and Long.
We're going to talk about the presidential election, the mayoral election, and maybe another presidential election when we start talking about Andrew Cuomo, when CityWide continues right after this.
Well, I first started skating with my friend. He had an extra board, and then he just gave it to me, and I've been skating ever since. Well, when I don't land a trick and I have my mind set on something and I'm not getting what I want, I just keep going for it until I get it right. My mom, she didn't go to college, so she wants me to experience that whole thing, and so I could end up getting like a good job. I think to get into college, I'll have to be determined. Just like when I want to get a new trick, and skating's helped me realize I've got what it takes.
Welcome back to CityWide. We're speaking with Josh Benson from the online publication Capital New York. It is very odd for a political observer to be located in New York right now, because this is not a battleground state. We're not seeing the mail, the lawn posters, the editorials in places like Ohio, Nevada, even Pennsylvania, if you believe some of the polling. And at the same time, while information is more accessible than it ever was before, you can go to the polling sites and read the latest polls every day, just like the professionals do. It's overwhelming. There's just so much information, so many voices from so many different places, and yet we're not actually seeing real people and real voters. How are those of us in the city who are trying to figure out what's going to happen in November supposed to make sense of any of this?
Well, I mean, I guess it's a blessing in the sense that you know, a very common trap to fall into with the presidential race is to sort of ride the roller coaster, the ups and downs, the national polls. I think you know how useful those always turn out to be, right. And in this election in particular, There's always this one great big factor called the economy that's going to determine so much about which way the swing states actually tip in the end. So I would like to think that the best thing to do is to pay attention to what the candidates are actually doing in terms of staking out positions on the issue, because those are the least ephemeral factors here. Those are the things they can't just run away from once they've said them. But in terms of the ding-dong battle, especially with the cycle the way it is now, going back and forth 7-8 times a day, it's fun, it's sometimes important, it's not determinative.
Right. I mean, it seems to have boiled down at the moment to the president trying to argue that he's done a good enough job to merit re-election and to disqualify Romney to the extent that he can. And with Romney, it's exactly the opposite. Without either of them at the moment having offered sort of a positive vision. And I suspect that this is an election that matters. People are paying attention to it. But I also suspect that it's going to be an election where the national conventions, even if they're infomercials for the parties, where the national conventions are actually going to be important in terms of setting the table for what will be a very brief campaign after that.
Well, so I think that's quite right, particularly in Mitt Romney's case, because he's left so many blanks to be filled in later. So even when he comes down forcefully and criticizes a position that Obama has taken or a statement that Obama has made, as with this decision about the deportations, he doesn't actually offer his own position. He doesn't offer
Would you
an
repeal it?
alternative.
Yeah, the
Right.
president should have done something about it sooner. If he was serious, he would have gotten Congress. Well, will you repeal his executive order? No clear answer.
Precisely. We'll deal with that when the time comes. And
Right.
he's very disciplined about that. So in theory, the convention should be very important, because if they have, if there's a Pat Buchanan pitchforks moment, this could scare a lot of people off who are still forming their opinions about Mitt Romney. The one thing I'd say about that is the conventions have become, yes, you use the word infomercial, but even compared to the way they were 3-4 cycles ago, they're so disciplined, even in terms of who gets the speaking slots, that well, I would be pleasantly surprised if there were a surprise.
Let's turn a little bit back to New York politics, and the governor seems to be remarkably effective. Is that a tribute to his own personal political skills, or a sign of how exhausted and bankrupt everybody else in Albany had become?
Both, absolutely both. He's a skillful guy. He's been around the block a couple of times, not only serving as an operative for his father when Mario was the governor, but having run for governor before and becoming this sort of textbook example of how not to do things. He learned from his mistakes. He went through that much publicized period of humility. He came into the attorney general job and did more with it, or as much with it as Eliot Spitzer did. And so he's done a lot right in terms of how to handle Albany.
I would also argue that his political father is not his father Mario, the liberal lion of the left. His political fathers are Bill Clinton and Al Gore, who were much more centrist and also very disciplined about controlling their message and about their relationships with, in their case, with Congress.
I think he's certainly closer to where they are in terms of where they placed themselves on the spectrum and the flexibility that it allows them to take different positions on different issues. I think he was undoubtedly formed in the crucible of what his father went through, even if at times it seems like he's determined not to repeat what he views as avoidable mistakes that his father made. Or actually, it's not just mistakes. His father was, as you said, the liberal lion, and once he made one of the most celebrated speeches in Democratic Party and Democratic Convention history, that was what he was. There was no getting away from it. And Cuomo has been remarkably determined, even by Clintonian standards, remarkably determined not to be put into any box. And that carries over into the way he's kept the Obama campaign at arm's length. He doesn't know how the election's going to turn out. He doesn't want to be seen as snubbing the president, but he will not utter a word that he thinks would give him trouble later.
Or he's just waiting, biding his time for
Well-
when his endorsement is the most valuable to the president, and he gets the most points for having delivered it.
I think that's absolutely that is absolutely part of the equation. But I think this is an overarching thing. This is not just in the way that he's played the politics of the presidential election or any other election. I think in the way he's governed too. You know, after the fact, when he's talking about what he's done, the word bold comes up a lot. But in terms of what goes into the decision making and the timing of those decisions, it's all very calculated.
Okay, so as a student of his father's relationship with Ed Koch, he probably has more than a passing interest over who's going to be the next mayor of the city of New York. So 2 questions. One is, who do you think he wants to be the mayor? And secondly, who do you think is going to be the mayor?
Well, he has a special relationship with Bill de Blasio going way back. This is just, I don't know that this has any bearing on the calculations that he's making right now, because we haven't seen anything publicly. But de Blasio worked for him when he was housing secretary, and they know each other going back a long way.
Thompson stepped up to the plate when he needed black support, co-chair of the campaign.
Exactly. So he has different relationships with the different candidates, and I think it's probably too early for him. He doesn't have to. He's not obliged to do anything decisive and irreversible now. So I think he could live with. He probably figures he could live with most of the Democratic field that's there now.
What about Christine Quinn? If she is the Bloomberg candidate for mayor, as is widely perceived, does Cuomo want Bloomberg to pick his own successor?
Well, I think by the time the mayor election happens and a front runner emerges, Cuomo is going to take a position on him or her, and it will look as if he had a hand in determining the outcome of the race. I mean, this is a long way away, but this is the pattern with elections, with legislation. So I think we can, in shorthanding the candidates, it's not inaccurate to say that Quinn is an ally of Bloomberg, and that if he were choosing between the establishment Democratic candidates, he'd choose her. But I also think it oversimplifies a little to say that she's the Bloomberg candidate and that he would be controlling her when she's in office.
So quick, one line on each one. You've got Quinn and Lou, maybe Stringer, de Blasio, Thompson, Tom Allen. He's running, whether he's getting anywhere or not. So just quickly, is the conventional wisdom has sort of this thing laid out? What's your take?
Well, as is always the case this early, it's hard to argue with the conventional wisdom. Christine Quinn is obviously in a very strong position because she has heavy support from the establishment among the Democratic candidates, and she has the tacit backing, if we can say that, of the Bloomberg administration and his allies. But that's not the only thing that she is, because she came up through this very interesting route.
If that was the only thing that she was, then she wouldn't do any better than Gifford Miller or Peter Vallone Jr.
Alan Hevesy, yeah, we've seen this before.
Right.
That's exactly right. So I think she has this extra leg to stand on, which is that she came up through liberal politics and the Democratic clubs and gay activism, and she's seen as both the establishment Bloombergian candidate and a liberal, a bona fide liberal. So that gives her some breadth, and I think that puts her in a good position. And then I think Bill Thompson is in a good position by virtue of the fact that he's a known commodity, likable guy, but he ran before. He's held citywide office. He ran before. He outperformed expectations for some of us because he didn't run a flashy campaign or even a particularly good one, you could argue. But he almost beat Michael Bloomberg, who spent an ungodly amount of money to win.
Is Scott Stringer in Christine Quinn's way and vice versa, and is Bill de Blasio and in Bill Thompson's way and vice versa?
Well, to a certain extent, right? If we're whacking it up by geography, then they certainly are, and the bases overlap.
Or ethnicity.
Or ethnicity. But I think They're in different places. I do think they're competing with each other, but you could also argue that Stringer and de Blasio are in this death match. You could argue that de Blasio and Thompson are in a death match. You know, I think what Stringer and de Blasio, basically everyone who isn't Quinn and Thompson in a sense, because he has this easily definable base and a proven chunk of the electorate that's going to vote for him. Everyone else has to worry about how they can get into a runoff and how they can identify themselves that's distinct from everyone else. So again, with the proviso that this is exactly what the conventional wisdom is, I think those are the two who have an institutional advantage that way.
And do you think, do voters want a fourth Bloomberg term, whoever is the mayor, but carrying out the same Bloomberg agenda? Or perhaps more accurately, do you think by the time we get to November of 13, people are going to be looking for more of the same?
They'll be heartily sick of Bloomberg himself, because this is a function of the third term, and especially the circumstances under which he got himself the third term. But people can say more than one thing to a pollster and mean it. They don't want him, and they're ready for a change. But there was a lot that worked when Bloomberg was mayor, and they won't want to go away from that.
My thanks to Josh Benson, the co-editor and a founder of the online publication Capital New York. I'm Ken Fisher. Thanks for joining us in this edition of CityWide. Send your comments and suggestions to CityWide at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Or contact us at cuny.tv.